Hey everyone, this is your host Fred and my partner Lori, and this is the Marketing Material Handling Webcast.
We're so excited for you guys to join us today, and we're going to have our very first guest to the webcast, Shari Altergott from the CX Edge. We really wanted to talk about marketing and the way that customer experience is coming into play and really is what marketing has evolved into. So super excited to have you with us, Shari. Thank you.
Welcome to the show, Shari.
Thank you so much for having me. And I am so honored to be your first guest.
History in the making.
This is fantastically exciting. So thank you for having me.
We'll re-invite you on our 100th episode.
Yes,
that's
episode.
After we win an Emmy.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, customer experience. And when Lori sent the information, I was like, yeah, that's kind of true now what you're saying. And like our topic for today, like Lori said, is the new marketing landscape, which is the customer experience. And we have Shari here to kind of like tell us what that is all about. But before we do, Lori, I thought you had some questions for Shari about her journey from.
I do.
Let's hear them.
I do. So I know Shari has had a long history in not just marketing, but material handling. So very relatable to me, and also as a female in the world of material handling. So I would like for Shari to share a little bit about her background and even her transition to CX Edge.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And Lori, it's been so good getting to know you through the years, through different women in industry events and whatnot. Yeah. So it's always nice to know that there's more than one of us out there.
That's right.
So I have been in material handling for 20 years, which means that I started when I was 12. And my background really has always been sales, marketing, and business development. To be totally honest with you, I was 20 years old when I started material handling. I had never heard of material handling before. I thought at the interview it was like waste management or something like that. And I really was just looking for a job. I was about to finish my bachelor's degree. I was working in retail. I just wanted to find a job to get office experience, so I could get a real job one day.
Right.
Well, cut to this, job that really I was considered the office helper when I came into it. And we were a Raymond dealer outside Chicago. And it turns out I ended up working there for over 18 years. I left that company as the vice president of customer experience to start my own firm, really focused on the customer experience. I started the CX Edge in 2019 in October. At that time, the timing for me was perfect, but I didn't know that only a few months later we'd go into a national pandemic, and I would not only be a business owner, but a short order cook, at-home teacher,
That's right.
entertainment director. So it was, for our first year company, it was very interesting to go through it during this time, but I was very fortunate in 2020.
Sort of similar experience, so like you, Lori, where you guys started like entry level kind of position and just worked your way up. And it kind of tells me too, and similar to myself, I did not have like MBA in marketing and all that higher education in marketing, but through experience and hard work, we get to a place where we get to kind of like lead. And like I was saying, similar story to yours, Lori, eh?
Well, what I always found interesting with Shari and what I noticed about you even before we met was that your title was changing. And in the world of material handling, it was unique for there to be a dedicated marketing manager, let alone somebody that was going from marketing coordinator to marketing manager to a VP of anything. And so that was always interesting to me, was what was it that people value? Like, how did they see that marketing was really bringing the value where they thought it was worth the elevation?
Yeah, and I think I've talked to a lot of people about this, and Lori, I think you and I have talked about in the past that in this industry, especially, a lot of times it was the girl that knows how to use PowerPoint and
Yeah.
Publisher
Yeah.
became the marketing person, and they
Mm-hmm.
put together PowerPoints and did golf outings. And my experience was no different when I first started. Um, and I think that the industry at that time, 20 years ago, didn't value what marketing can really bring to the table. I was
Mm-hmm.
incredibly fortunate that about 5 years into my career, we had a changing of leadership at the company, and the person that came in, Mike Romano, who people might know through Toyota and Bastion,
Mm-hmm.
really came in and really believed in the value of marketing. And so, really, our partnership, his leadership and belief in the value of marketing really helped to elevate it to what it ended up being by the time I left. Now,
Yeah.
his vision really was the foundation of that, because without a leader that really values it, it's never going to work. It's never going to get to that level. But I'm
Mhm.
also a pretty data driven individual, meaning making decisions based off of data, proving what's working, proving what's not working. And so all of that really helped. I mean, when I
No
started,
doubt.
we didn't have a website, and they bought me a book. They bought me a $20 book and said, build a website. And I had zero budget.
Was
I
Zero.
was
that
going to
20 years
ask
ago?
you. So I had a question prepared that was like, what was the most old school marketing
Yeah.
tactic? Yeah, you're bringing it right now.
So yeah,
Yeah,
they bought me a book, and at that time there just wasn't this investment. By the time I left, and again, this is 18 years later, and the organization grew tremendously. I had almost $1 million budget for marketing. By the time
Wow.
I left, and
Wow.
it was all driven because we were able to show definable results. And if
uh-huh.
you can show that and you're really tracking that, it's easier to get the budget dollars than if it's just like, well, we're just going to try
Mhm.
this and see what
Yeah.
works. So I think it's a
Yeah,
partnership of the two, of having great leadership, but also having really good metrics that you're managing and measuring to continue to improve.
yeah, that's great. Actually, Lori, if you don't mind, I have a question now. Uh, in terms of like attribution and data, customer experience, if you can share, like, how are you able to measure? I'm sure like surveys are handy in like measuring like customer experience, but can you show us or tell us how you measure that? And as well, how are we really linking customer experience with marketing? How
Mhm.
it's now becoming more and more common that they're kind of related.
Well, I'll start with the first part of your question in terms of measurement, because I think that's a really important point.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say there isn't a very well defined formula. A lot of organizations use Net Promoter Score, but
Mhm.
that's based off of survey results, and it's incredibly limited. And I don't think it's a great viewpoint of your entire customer base. Um, so I've created various metrics for different organizations, and it really depends on the data your organization collects and what's important to the organization. So one of the most recent kind of customer experience measurements that I created for a client was really, well, let's just look at the foundational elements of customer experience. If our customers have a great experience, what should be happening? The customers we currently have should be spending more. So we
Mhm.
started measuring year over year revenue for customers, right? So which customers are spending more? And then we had a benchmark to kind of assign a number to that, right? So that's the first thing. And that really dictates loyalty, right? So if they're
Mhm.
spending
Yeah.
more with you, they're more loyal. And
Mhm.
then I think there's a second component to that of getting new clients, right? Based on your reputation, you have a good customer experience. So then we had a second metric where we're measuring new business coming in. How many new accounts do we have? We assigned a number to that. And then we also did a customer survey. So we had a number assigned to the customer survey. So that's getting general feedback from the marketplace. We took those three metrics
Mm-hmm.
and really averaged them out into a score of what made sense for us. So that's what I mean about it could vary from organization depending on the level of information you have. Obviously, the more information you have, the better. But
Right.
I think if you look at those three basic components that every organization should have, you should be doing a customer survey super easy to measure. I guarantee your accounting department can measure how much money customers have spent year over year and if they're spending more with you. That also gives you an opportunity to identify customers that are spending less with
That's
you
right.
and
Yeah.
reach out and find why. And then it's usually very easy to measure new customers and the amount that they're spending with you. So those are the three metrics I like to use, but I think it really becomes a blended average of those. It's
I'm
not one or the other.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested. I'm interested, Sherry, on how you are able to isolate that uh, against other marketing activities, like your regular ads, Google ads, email marketing, because you can get new business from those two. How are you able to isolate customer experience for those new customers or money spent?
So I think that goes to the second part of your question of how does customer experience fit into marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And from my viewpoint, marketing's always done the customer experience. We just never called it that.
Yes.
I think
Agreed.
Mm.
customer experience has become this almost lofty term that people have been using, for the
Yeah.
last 10 years without really understanding exactly what it means. So I found that I think one of marketing's jobs is to make things easier for people to understand. So in my role at my former company, I tried to break down, I always believe marketing owns the customer experience, but I needed to be able to communicate what that experience is. And I defined it in the four components that I believe are part of the customer experience. And it's people, product, process, and feedback. Those four things. So there's elements in each one of those. And to me, they're all related to marketing in a fundamental sense. So if you start with people, which I think is the foundation of customer experience, I think we know
Mm-hmm.
that you have to have the right people. You have to have people that are engaged in your business. So although typically an HR function, I really fought for the idea of marketing should be involved in recruiting the right people through that messaging of who we are and what we
Yes.
do. Marketing
Yes.
should be involved in training our employees about what our company does and why they should be excited about it. And marketing should be involved in employee engagement and getting people to be emotionally connected to our business. So that's kind of the people part. When you get to the product part, those are the fundamental traditional marketing communications, SEO, digital marketing, content writing, brand management, advertising, you name it, all those fundamental marketing elements, because all of those affect how a potential customer interacts with your business, the customer experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get to the next piece, process, and you guys know through Toyota, I spent a lot of time studying TPS. I went through the TPS training at Toyota, really learned about standard work and process management. And that whole fundamental idea of we have all of these processes that our employees or our customers have to go through that are complicated and duplicated. So anytime somebody's having frustration in a process, whether it's an employee or a customer, that's limiting the customer experience. So now that becomes your third point.
That's right.
And I think your final point in feedback to me is super fundamental that you can't make real change without getting real feedback from the people it affects. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm a huge proponent in getting customer feedback, market feedback, vendor feedback, employee feedback. And I've done that through surveys, through roundtables, through a myriad of different avenues. But to
Mm-hmm.
me, that's the way you really make change. So I think when you merge all four of those together, there is an argument for why those components belong under a marketing umbrella.
Wow,
Mm-hmm.
you're giving us more work there, Sherry.
Do you know it's so I keep wanting to take notes and I keep having to remind myself I can watch this back. It's okay. But it's so hard. I want to take 1,000 notes and I wanted to share with you, Sherry, that we have a new director of human resources, and she and I were talking about a week ago, and we were talking about recruitment and how difficult it is to capture all the good candidates because the job market it's really on fire right now. And I said, how can marketing support you? How can I support these recruitment efforts? And she said, you know what? Marketing has never asked me that before at other places. I don't even know how to answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
But I am a big believer in that as well. As if you go get a cup of coffee and you have all of these negative touch points in between. Oh, that traffic light is terrible. Oh, it's difficult to turn into the drive-through. Oh, they made my order wrong, right? The barista wasn't friendly. There's so many things that affect whether or not you go back to get a cup of coffee from the same place again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a very if I analyze what you're saying now, which makes sense to me, but like I was kidding earlier, but I was kind of not kidding, is because when I said you're giving us marketing people more work, is because if you think about it, marketing in the old ways is just get us leads and we stop
Mm,
there. But
yeah.
now you're saying about, which makes sense though, all of that from all those four items that you mentioned, that whole customer experience
Mm,
is kind of like needs to be touched by marketing. And I guess you're seeing now in the corporate world that this is now being a more extensive type of department. We're not marketing is not just doing pay per click. We're doing all those things, and
mm,
in your definition is part of marketing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say that marketing should be in charge of recruiting or taking anything away from HR, some of those other departments, but marketing definitely deserves a seat at the head table and definitely needs to work in collaboration with
right.
departments
Right.
like HR, like operations, because all of those things affect the customer experience. And
Mhm.
I love the point, that your new HR director made because it's very
Mm-hmm.
true. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes there's resistance that for
Yeah,
HR
there
to work
can
with
be.
marketing
Mm-hmm.
or whatever the case may be. But the reality is, if you think about it, our job, we're out there marketing to potential customers of why they should do business with us. Why wouldn't we also be in charge of marketing to potential employees as to
Mm-hmm.
why they want to come work with us? And I think our skill set is better suited to attract the
Yeah.
talent,
Yeah.
than maybe is ingrained within an HR department typically.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Sherry, that the biggest marketing challenge is for material handling specifically?
I think it's the recognition of what marketing really is, to be honest. I think, a lot of people will say they're having trouble getting, I hear a lot that we just need inbound leads. We need more
Mm-hmm.
inbound leads. And yes, everybody wants more inbound leads. I have never talked to one client that says I have too many inbound leads. Stop. I don't want any more. And and that should be our goal. Our goal is
Right.
to drive revenue and brand awareness for the
Right.
company. But I think it's difficult to do that unless marketing has the appropriate seat at the table with the appropriate budget to make those things a
Mm-hmm.
reality
And
Mhm.
because it's
resources.
not free, And you were going to
Mm-hmm.
ask, you had said earlier, you're going to ask about what's kind of the oldest kind of marketing thing I did. When I started, and I remember this number so clearly, 20 years ago, they were spending $80,000 a year on Yellow Pages.
Yellow pages.
$80,000.
Yeah.
20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And when I finally had convinced them to, like, first we went down to like 50,000 and then like finally got out
Mm-hmm.
of that. But yet, when initially I went to get a marketing budget, they're like, oh, I'll give you like $5,000. And in my head, I'm like, you
Right.
were spending $80,000 on Yellow Page ads. And the
Right.
reason is because leadership at that time really believed in Yellow Pages and they
Right.
didn't understand the digital space. And
Mhm.
again, that's some time ago. I hope nobody's listening that's going through a Yellow Page problem today. But
Well,
you
that's
know,
where I came from. Before I came to material handling, I was at Yellow Pages
oh, really?
for a year. Yeah. And I remember how difficult it was for me to cut back the budget here because that had been my world. That's what I had been taught was how to successfully market your company. So yeah, we get these things ingrained into our brains that this is how it works. And 2020 is a perfect example of we can't stay stuck anymore. Think about all the technology and the resources that we have had at our fingertips for 5 to 10 years, but we haven't taken advantage of them. There hasn't been that push to have to do it. And COVID introduced some of that to us and said, it's time to do it. Yeah. And I do think marketing has been able to shine, Shari.
Yeah,
That
Yeah,
absolutely.
me too.
people understood it a little bit more, what we could bring to the table, and that's been exciting.
So, yeah, same in my case. Like marketing has become like more central because we're able
Mm-hmm.
to provide like content and technology even to salespeople. Like in our company, marketing has a big participation in sales development, especially
Yes.
virtual selling, because we're more advanced in that way. Sherry, if I could ask, what if you're gonna come to a potential customer, what services do you offer, and how would you sell your agency or your company to a prospective client?
So it's very similar to what I just talked about. I started this business with the foundation of what I believe customer experience is: people, product, process, and feedback. Those four elements. So that is how my business is structured, around those four components. So typically, no organization, nor would I ever recommend you do a complete overhaul of all four of those elements at once. So, usually there's a need within one of those four things, and that's just where we start. In 2020, we did a lot in the digital space, as Lori said, because that was just a big focus in 2020, because a lot of organizations realized they weren't where they needed to be. And then it kind of leads down the path to other opportunities. So I don't sell any software. I don't have any canned programs that I give anybody. All of our training is developed specifically for an organization. All of our programs are developed specifically for an organization,
Hmm.
but they all fall into one of those four buckets: people, product, process, and feedback.
Hmm.
That's good. Do you find resistance to even just the phrase of customer experience, because it is just like for a while it was solutions, right? Solutions
Yeah.
was the big word, still kind of is, but do people even know what it is and what it can do? How do you explain it to them?
I think that's a great question. And no, people don't know what it is. I think
Mm,
it's become a word, much like culture has become a word, that
yeah.
it's a word, but people can't understand it, or don't, not that they don't understand, but they don't really understand what it means. And so I did a presentation a few years ago at a conference, and I kind of opened up with, who here thinks customer experience is important? And every single hand goes up.
Everybody, right.
And then I said, well, how many people have a budget and resources dedicated to improving the customer experience?
Mm-hmm.
And zero hands went up, right? So what that means is that people conceptually know what it is, but they don't know how to define it. And how important is it really if you don't have a budget or resources allocated to it?
Mm-hmm.
And then I really go through in detail kind of those four elements of people, product, process, and feedback, to bring in that holistic view of what it is. And when you start breaking down in those four parts, people can say, oh, there's something we could do in that space of maybe training employees. Oh, there's something we could do in that space of, maybe digital. There's something we can do in that space of, creating more defined processes. There's something we need to do in feedback. So I think once you break it down to those more simplistic elements, then people start to say, okay, now I'm like starting to get there. And it can be a slow process for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And maybe even why people start out, but then they let go of it, is because it generally takes more than one person, more than one
Yeah.
department, right, to all move forward in the same direction. And that's the piece that without a focused person, without the focused budget and support, nobody has time
Hmm.
to keep everything on pace and people accountable.
And I was gonna ask that too. It's like this is not a overnight like change, and like where you can in Google you put in $1,000, you get a couple of
Right.
leads the next month. This one will take, I guess, months and years before you even see an effect, because you're literally changing culture And I
Yeah,
was thinking
that's true.
while you guys are speaking, like even going on your website is a customer experience.
Yes.
So it's a very, very complex thing that like Lori was saying, you have to keep at it, because if you just let go of the gas, it, it's not gonna happen. It's a
Mhm.
culture change. From what
Yeah,
I see, Sherry.
I totally agree. I think to fully get there, it's a very, I mean, it's much like branding is. It's a long-term process that takes a lot of commitment and a lot of time. But I also think there are small things that you can do
Mhm.
that do have change right in the beginning. So I had a client the other day at a phone call, and he was like, we were talking about the customer experience, and he's just like, I don't even know where to start,
Yeah.
you know. And then I think that's how a lot of people feel. So I said, well, let's just start with, let's just do a customer survey, a branding customer experience driven survey. So this is different than a product quality survey. It's a different type of survey. And the one thing I will say about surveying, it is very much a science into how you ask questions, the type of selectors you have, and how you measure that. So you have to really either hire somebody like the CX Ed to do it for you, or you need to really know
Yeah.
what you're doing in terms of answering, asking questions. So I said, let's just start with the survey. To me, that's the best way to start because our customers are going to tell us, are going to tell you what you need to do better. And
Mhm.
usually they're not too shy about doing that. So let's get the feedback, let's get the data, and then let's just start from there and make a plan. And I think that's the easiest way to start instead of coming up with what you believe your biggest issues are. Let your employees tell you, let your customers tell you, and let your vendors tell you. I think a lot of people leave vendors out of the equation, but they're such a
Mhm.
critical component to the customer experience as well.
So let me ask you a question on that because um, I made a suggestion about surveying a few customers, and it was said to me that maybe I wasn't giving our salespeople enough credit for knowing about the customer, right? So, hey, I'm sharing information with you. You're not really listening, marketing. And I was like, oh, I didn't really know how to respond to that or to know which way was better.
Yeah, I think so. I'll give an example that I talked with a different client, and he really felt that there are some strategies he wanted to implement. And I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but I know in the marketplace they're viewed as kind of an old school house, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And but when I talk to him, he thinks they're, and he's the owner of the company, they're the most innovative company ever, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he
Mm-hmm.
believes that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good that they believe that and that his employees believe that. I think salespeople are similar to that, where because they have this view or this perception, maybe they don't see exactly all of the
Yeah.
things that the customer might be saying. And I told him it's hard to hear sometimes customer feedback because a lot of times it doesn't match with how you
Mm,
view your company or how you view yourself, but it's a
yeah.
really important part of the process. And I found that again, salespeople are salespeople, and people don't want to believe bad things. And a lot of times, a customer interacting with a salesperson that they have to interact with on a regular basis doesn't want to say anything negative to them because
Yeah.
most people
Yeah.
avoid conflict. So
Yeah.
even if you're upset, a lot of times if I have to see you again, I don't know that I want to create that tension.
Sure.
And so a
Sure.
lot of times the salespeople aren't even getting the real feedback because the customer just doesn't want that level of conflict. So
Mhm.
I've always been a proponent of having all customer surveys sent out from either a third party, like I do for clients, or from the marketing department. Because my explanation to salespeople then has always been if a customer says something or if somebody's unhappy with the survey, then you just have to blame corporate marketing. Like just blame me.
Mhm.
Because then it takes you out of it. It
Right.
takes you
Right.
out of
Right.
it. Just say this is something, corporate marketing wanted to do and they sent it out and then you're out of the conversation. And I think if you do the survey the right way and you really look at the feedback, I've been in surveys where we've saved accounts that if you ask the
Yeah.
salesperson, what was going on. They thought everything was perfect.
Yeah.
But we did the survey, and the feedback we got back was we could lose this account. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's helping them gain customer loyalty into that account by asking for feedback. It's a
Yeah.
mutually beneficial initiative. It benefits the
Yeah.
company, and it should benefit the salesperson's relationship too.
Yeah, in our we just about 3 months ago worked with Trustpilot. You guys would know Trustpilot. It's a surveying like platform and website, and what we did is we needed to get 100 surveys back in so that our products will have a rating on Google. So we did send to a lot of customers a blast of if you could give us a survey. A lot of the results are good and positive, but there was quite a few that's really
Mm-hmm.
not good and actually hard to read. And why I'm saying this is aside from knowing what the some of the customers really feel, it gives us a chance to correct some of just the relationship of like
Hmm.
once we get this feedback 1 star and they're really like really mad about it, then it gives our division managers a chance to call them and rectify what fix the problem, and it just gives us a chance to get back in there. So aside from getting that feedback like you guys are saying, or what's the customer really saying, you have that what do you call that, you can reconnect with the customers if
Yeah.
you're doing surveys.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great tool. And that's why I think if you couple surveys with kind of to circle back to the beginning of really looking at revenue trends and buying behaviors of customers,
Mm-hmm.
you can also pick up those customers who don't respond to the survey that might be slowly
Right.
moving away from you. So I think if you really have a twofold strategy that you're using survey data, but you're also using the financial data you have access to, you can really save accounts before it's too late. If you think about it, if you only do an annual survey, you know, a customer might be filling out a survey for something that they were pissed off about 6 months ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now they've just continually gotten more pissed off.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to save those accounts when it's gotten that bad. So the sooner you can rectify situations, the better. But you also have to be careful of over surveying. So when you get
Mm-hmm.
into transactional surveys, then you just get such a low response rate that it almost becomes not worthy of it, of even collecting the data at times.
Hmm.
So you have to find that right mix of what makes sense. But I think it's a twofold strategy. I think you can't rely on just net promoter score. You can't rely on just customer surveys to really give you a good picture of how you're doing and how you're serving.
What is everybody's feeling about kind of away from the surveys and even the sales process, but just simply people calling in to the dealership, right? So those inbound calls, maybe it's an active customer, maybe it's the first time they've called, and are we handling that customer experience in the correct way?
So I love that question. It was a at my former organization maybe a point of contention at times because at
Mhm.
least at that time reception essentially reported to HR.
Mhm.
And I believed that reception should report to marketing because I can train them, in terms of how to answer the calls. And then I can have them start tracking if they're new calls or, because a lot of times it goes on reception, you lose a lot of trackability unless you're using one attached to your website or whatever the case. But you lose
Yeah.
some trackability because, people just want to get rid of the call. So they're sending
Hmm.
in,
Yeah.
to
Transfer, right?
service or wherever. And that is really kind of a point of really bad customer experiences in those phone
Mhm.
calls.
Mhm.
Um, so I actually started recording some reception phone calls to make the point of these
Mhm.
are new people calling in and they got stuck with the salesman's voicemail. And if
Yeah.
somebody new is calling, they should never get well. Nobody should get a voicemail unless they're asking for that person. But
Mhm.
especially somebody new because they were looking up, and this is what they were trying to do. So it's nothing about the person doing the job. They were trained to look at the zip code list, and send
Right.
it to salesperson, Adam Smith. And that's what they did. And then he had a new
Right.
customer leave a voicemail. So I believe that marketing, if it doesn't report to marketing, marketing should be involved in the training process. There
Mhm.
should
Mhm.
be a process in terms of tracking some of those calls. And there are electronic ways to do that to some capacity. But I think it's a really important part that people miss in terms of
Mhm.
training.
I'm excited to hear you say that, because that is a big shift for us where we refer to it as the manager of first impressions, the MoFi, that is the team. And so for us, that is the transition that's happening, is it's becoming part of the marketing umbrella. And I'm
That's
really
awesome.
excited about that and the impact that it can have. Pretty overwhelming, but breaking it down, doing the baby steps, and
Mhm.
just really saying we'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah, it turned on a light bulb on my head too.
Yeah.
Because now that I'm like listening to what you guys are saying, we Sherry Lifto. I work for Liftover in Canada, and we have a lot of branches, and the
Yes.
branches have like reception that been there forever. And now that you're saying that, I'm thinking now, if can I get free consultation from you, Sherry?
Not free. You,
Know your value, Sherry. Know
yeah,
your value.
not
I'll give
free
you coffee when I
consultation,
see you. A
but I
nice
will give you the friends and family discount for this time.
Okay, no, okay, just maybe like a general tip, because these, like I said, these some of these receptions are like been here with us even longer than me, and now we're gonna say, okay, marketing should have a hand in what you guys do and how you say it. How would you like kind of sell that to the top or to the
Mhm.
leadership?
I think everything tends to be more successful if there's data involved.
Mm,
Um, so the way, and I actually did this with our parts and service group because I think there's a lot of similarities between reception and service dispatch and parts correspondence because
Yes.
they're doing the same thing, right?
Absolutely.
They're intaking calls.
Yep.
And I'm not suggesting that parts and service should also report to marketing, but
No.
I think that marketing should have a role in the training of how they do that. And what I found is a lot of people, I mean, 99.9% of your team members aren't intentionally doing something wrong. They're not intentionally being rude. They just have been trained in a different way. So
Mhm.
um, I actually hired a mystery shopping company and recorded a few. So what they do, they act like a mystery shopper. They call in, ask for a part or service, record the call, and send you the call. And so they did about 10 of these for me. I listened to them all and I played them one by one for our executive team. And and again, nobody was overtly rude. Nobody did anything like out of the norm. But when you're on the other end listening, there was a customer that was on hold for probably 10 minutes and nobody ever checked back in to say, hey, I'm still looking it up. And you know that the person was doing their job and they were looking up the part, but they never
Mhm.
thought to get back to the customer. So for me, by playing those calls, it made the realization to management that, we might have a problem. The tricky part was selling it to the people that I had mystery shopped. Because if
Mhm.
you were recorded without
Mhm.
knowing, as you could imagine, you might not be super happy with that.
Right.
But it worked out really well in the end because, and I told them from my own experience. So there was a time, one of the first presentations I had done, my boss came up to me and said, that was a really great presentation, but you said the word right like 100 times. And
right,
so my right, like I would say, right, right, right.
right.
And so my first reaction was to say, no, I didn't. And he's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm telling you, you said right. And I'm like, no, I didn't. And thankfully or unthankfully, that particular presentation was recorded. I went back and
Oh
I went
no.
back and listened to that presentation, and I made a little mark every time I said the word right. And I didn't say it 100 times, but I said it more times than I should have. And
Mhm.
so, how I kind of sold the same concept to the people that were mystery shopped was the only way that I thought I was a good speaker. But the only way that I can get better is if I listen to myself, because we all do things that we just don't realize
Mhm.
we're doing.
Right.
And so kind of sold that to them in the same capacity of, I'm not saying you're even doing anything wrong, but I'm saying if you want to be the best at what you do, you need to listen to yourself. And it's a terrible experience. Even to this
Mhm.
day, I still listen to everything that I record, and I painfully listen to it back just to figure out like what I could have done differently. But it's helped me become a better speaker, a better presenter. And for people that are answering the phones, they're such a critical component of our business that if they can
They
hear
are.
themselves, they do pick up on things that they're like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that I put them on hold for 10 minutes because I was off here doing that.
Right.
And so now that they hear it and they hear it from the other end, it kind of makes that recognition of, I could have like checked back and said it'll be like 2 more minutes and things like that. So
Mhm.
I think as long as you make it a learning experience and a mutually beneficial experience for both parties, then you overcome some of those negative feelings that can exist about people believing, I've heard it 1,000 times. I've done it this way for 30 years. I don't need to change. I'm the best at what I do, until you hear yourself do what you do, because
Mhm.
usually it's not as great as you think it is. And that's hard to hear. But I think it's the only way that we can grow and get better.
Yeah, totally. I always thought that I was a good singer, but then when I
I
heard
know.
myself, I said, "Oh, you suck." But Lori, we actually got way over our 30-minute mark. If
Mhm.
you just have like a last few questions, and
I do. I have
yeah,
just really one wrap up
mm,
question, which
okay,
is I think Shari would agree that you're seeing material handling really bring it more from a advertising perspective, especially digital, right? We've
Yeah.
seen PPC budgets skyrocket. It becomes very difficult for local dealerships to compete. So I'm curious from your perspective, now that you're working beyond the material handling landscape, even, but what's the new? What's the up and coming? What's the thing that we should be paying attention to as material handling marketers?
I think it's really using data, and I don't think
Okay.
enough people do that in terms of using the market data that's
Yeah.
available.
Guilty.
Number one, there's tons of free market data available, whether it's through Mahita or MHI. Google has tons of tools. I had a company recently that was looking to roll out a new product and wanted market data and if it was going to be viable. And the very first thing I did is look to see how many people were searching for that search term
Mm-hmm.
on Google. And Google can tell us so much through just data of what people are really looking for. Too many times I've been in a room where sales managers and leadership say, this is what we should do, this is what we should do. And they have experience and we should take that into consideration. But
Mm-hmm.
there's so much data available to us to make better decisions. And it
You're
really is
right.
figuring out a way to harness that data and use it effectively and
You're
make those
right.
data driven decisions.
Yeah, that's good because I know I personally am very guilty of that and sometimes don't even know where to get started. That's great advice. Great advice. So,
yep, great
how
tip.
can people find you, Shari? We'll wrap up with that.
Hmm.
Anybody can go to our website. It's cx-edge.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. The company is the CX Edge, but I also have profiles on there, all under Shari Altergott. I'm really active on all social media, post every day. Every Tuesday, we post tips. So we're constantly posting ways to improve the customer experience. So I would encourage everyone to follow us and keep in touch.
Well,
Very
thank you
good.
for being our first guest,
Thank
Sherry.
you
Yes.
for having
Thank
me. I'm
you.
so
Like you
excited.
said, and it's a good talk, eh?
Yes. Learned
For
so
it to go
much.
over 30 minutes, I think it's a good conversation. But yeah, so happy to you to be our first guest and see you on our 101st episode,
Yes, I can't wait
Lori.
till the 101st episode.
Thank you, Shari.
All right. Thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. So, Lori, let's send it off. We'll see you on the next episode.
See you then.
Bye bye.
Bye.